Welcome to Museum Rat. I am your host, Doug Y. We are recording here at the beautiful Pasadena Media Studios and broadcasting on Arroyo channel. Today we have a very special episode. It is about one of my heroes, Charles White, a Los Angelino by way of Chicago and New York. Taught at Otis for many years, the art school. And really one of the most important artists of the 20th century, certainly one of the most important American artists of the 20th century. And I learned so much at this show, and in addition to being an incredibly potent artist with unbelievable technique, he also has a potency, a poignancy to his work that few artists achieve. And as an educator, as a human being, really did wonderful things for his communities, for his students, and for his viewing public. Let's go ahead and get started. This is Seed of Love. Now, after the assassination of Martin Luther King in 1968, there are many subjects he could have chosen, but he chose the symbol of African American motherhood in order to put an image to the moment of consideration, and I think that in a moment of such turmoil, in 68 and 69, to paint something of such gentle kindness and strength, to remind everyone where they came from and what the seed of love means, I think was a really elegant choice. We have Micah, a depiction of the biblical character Micah. He pulls a lot from Christian theology, and sometimes will apply it to characters that are not directly the historical reference. Here we have kitchenette debutantes. This is the idea is that these characters were from a dilapidated and typically segregated apartment housing, and the use of the kitchenette, the apartment, and debutante, a high society young woman, is ironic and poignant. He produced these during his work with the Work Progress Administration. This is Preacher from 1940. Spiritual from 1941. This is My Brother from 1942. Card Players, 1936. This is a beautiful self-portrait of a young Charles White. And you can go, if you search him on YouTube, there are many short interviews with him, but there's a really lovely documentary, short documentary, that interviewed a number of his students over the years, and the impact that he had on them, the number of lives that this artist impacted. And that is a theme that I want to keep coming back to with this show, the idea of, well, what difference does it make to do anything? And actually it can make all the difference in the world. His work and his accessibility to so many people inspired an entire generation of artists, inspired the school, Otis, to become less formal, more curious, And you see the perpetuation, and then inspire me, inspire LACMA to have the show. The choices that we make, they ripple through time, forwards and backwards. It's a very interesting phenomenon, and you can kind of pin it down in a way with objects of art that is difficult for most other things, most other ephemera of life. This is John Brown from 1938. And this is called General Moses, which is a huge picture of Harriet Tubman in charcoal. Look at the expression on that face. The reality, the resolve depicted is staggering. And I sat in front of this picture for a long time, just looking at the figure that represents Harriet Tubman, General Moses. He depicts Harriet Tubman multiple times in his career. But there is such strength and power, quiet strength and power, coming from this image. And it is something that he depicts over and over again. The quiet, deep strength of the African American community, and in particular the women of the African American community and lineage. This is called There Were No Crops This Year from 1940. Look at that. I mean, it almost looks like a screen print or an ink blot, a block, but it's not. He's doing these in charcoal. They are absolutely gorgeous. Wow. This is the Negro to Democracy in America, followed by War Worker. Very ambivalent about African American military service to the federal government that he sees, rightly so, as having systematically denied the rights of his community and is yet conscripted. Soldier, again, very ambivalent. Yes, the uniformed body fights, but the face betrays the fear and loneliness of the individual who is fighting on behalf of a nation that is continuing to deny civil rights to these soldiers. Then he does workers' portraits. He does a lot of working class portraits. Beautiful. Also workers. And you know, one of the other things that was really interesting about Charles White, he almost dropped out of high school, and what his teachers discovered was that he had been going to the library to read, and he finished all of the art books in the library and noticed that there were no books on African art or black artists in America. And he went and he asked the librarian if there were any such books, and she said that they did not have any in circulation, but she brought her own book from home, a catalog of African art, and loaned it to young Charles White to study, to look at. And again, what difference does anything make? Well, something as simple as I have a book at home, come back tomorrow, can change somebody's life. And he said that he saw depictions of characters that looked like him, and a totally different and incredibly sophisticated lineage and culture being depicted artistically that had never been shown to him or in his school before. The return of the soldier. And I mean, there were like 150 pieces. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? I stood in front of this portrait for a very long time. I thought it was just exquisite. This is called Gideon. Followed by Exodus number 1, Black Moses. This is another depiction of Harriet Tubman. Followed by Worker, Young. And Frederick Douglass Lives Again, about the ghost of Frederick Douglass. Can a Negro Study Law in Texas, 1946. This is focusing on Herman Sweatt, who sued the University of Texas Law School because it did not admit African American students. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. This was portrayed in 1946. The case found its way to the Supreme Court, and Mr. Sweatt won. His case prevailed in the Supreme Court in 1950. This image had a social impact. Think about the Delacroix picture for imploring for Greek independence. Is art benign? Is it a valuable resource for pushing social and cultural agenda? It's both. This is called Birmingham Totem. It is a piece from 1964. It is about the 1963 Birmingham church bombing, the infamous Birmingham church bombing. And notice all of the marks and the grids that thrust toward the figure. And Charles White said, consider the figure as an architect of a new nation, that from this rubble and destruction, this figure will birth a new nation. Obviously, those birth and nation are charged in so many different ways and contexts, but I think that that's part of what Charles White was speaking of. Ye shall inherit the earth. Beautiful. Followed by Our Land. And Harvest Talk. He gets very interested in printing, lino cuts, and mentioned several times that the speed that he could work as a printing artist really allured him, but he didn't always have access to all of the apparatus that you would need to create prints. And he said that that was a main aspect to why he kept painting, that he would have moved totally into prints if he had had access to the contents. I've been buked and I've been scorned. Again, another depiction, the quiet strength of the African American woman. And the hardship that is continually endured, the suppression of that strength. The idea that this woman has been rebuked and scorned, and all of that power is dampened, is tamped down by the society that she lives in. And if that power were free, truly free to blossom, who would this woman be? These are linoleum cuts. This is called Young Farmer. And so this is, we'll be able to see a little bit of his process here, because here's the character, and the character in a context. So he cut the character, he was satisfied with that, then he built a background, printed the background first, the shirt of the character, also on the background plate, all being printed in red, and then the character printed over it. Beautiful work. This is called Black Pope Sandwich Board Man. It is an oil wash on board from 1973. Very, very complicated technique of application and then wiping away. Oil wash is difficult to work with, and he does it masterfully. We'll see it over and over again. I Have a Dream. This was a commission print from his LACMA show from 1976, again a Los Angeles based artist. And this print sold out several times over during the 76 show. It was very, very successful. Evening Song. This is called Dream Deferred 1. Notice the character up behind the boards. Dream deferred. What is the opportunity cost of a dream deferred? Very, very high. Dream Deferred 2. And again, abstract expressionism and then a figure. He could have finished this piece with nothing but shapes and texture without a figure, still would have been masterful. But to combine the two in a Dream Deferred, these characters inside of these rickety shacks, these hovels, combined with the title, really makes a very poignant statement about the cost of the individual who is impoverished. This is Love Letter 1, Love Letter 2, Love Letter 3, very famous piece by Charles White. Followed by The Sound of Silence, intentionally referencing Paul Simon and Garfunkel, and their song. Cat's Cradle, the theme of the boy entangled in these lines, the idea that his body is being used to hold the tension in those lines, can bloom with all kinds of very intense American themes, which become universal. These are etchings on paper. This is called Missouri Sea, followed by Mississippi, another depiction of Harriet Tubman. The starkness, what is in this picture? There is a white noise of a background. There is a nothingness. There is simply the individual and the blood. She does not know her beauty. And when you get acquainted with the personality of Charles White, he does have, there's obviously a revolutionary spirit and a deeply sensitive soul. Constant confirmation of African beauty, the power and majesty of African lineage. He wants his community to see themselves differently, to see themselves in a different light than the rest of the culture is portraying them. And at the same time, it is a depiction of admonishment for the culture that degrades this beauty. Now he begins a wanted poster series, and in this series, he takes a number of ads for enslaved peoples from wanted posters that were seeking their recapture. And he uses these references of these historical images in order to build a new formal language and process for himself. So this is again a cultural indictment. He faintly stencils in the enslaved person's name, the date of their escape, the monetary value, and their legal standing. This was the information that was found on these wanted posters. These are being done in oil, grease pencil, and crayon, and then made into prints. And again, he goes back to, over and over again, the beauty of the African body, the beauty of the culture, the sophistication of the lineage and heritage of the enslaved people here in America, and the revitalization of the cultural expression of that, which of course had been going on for a very long time, but in the early 20th century, Charles White picks it up and brings it into a more central space in American culture. This is a beautiful picture of Sammy Davis Jr. One of the things that Charles White was commissioned to do several times were promotionals for African American films. So he would do, this is Rex Ingram, Fred O'Neill, and Georgia Burke. He would do posters, illustrations, those sorts of things in order to elevate the material, in order to elevate the production. This beautiful piece, Portrait of Eartha Kitt. All of these were for a film called Anna Lucasta. He was determined to increase African American representation in popular culture, and we see it over and over and over again. Portrait of Tom Bradley, followed by Nat Turner, Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. And he focuses on this idea, this global cry of injustice. This is J'accuse, number 7. J'accuse, number 1. And J'accuse, number 6, which is a illustration of Harry Belafonte. Again, determined to increase African American representation in popular culture. And of course, Harry Belafonte was part of the vanguard of that fight. Abraham Lincoln and John Brown, the only two white people that Charles White ever depicted. And this was a two-parter, Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, the leading figures of the abolitionist movement. We're going to look at Bessie Smith, followed by a piece called Goodnight Irene, which of course references the Lead Belly blues standard. And finally, in the Charles White series, Gospel Singers from 1951. Charles White was an educator, he was a philosopher, and he lived his life with an enormous amount of joy and consideration for what he was doing, the impact it could have. And it is a testament for everyone to consider the impact that their work will have, whether it's as simple as giving someone a book, or as so many of his students said, showing up to an art school and seeing a teacher, a faculty member for the very first time that looked like them, that sounded like them, and how much that can change the perception for a young person of what is possible. And Charles White was intensely interested in all of those things. And he is a testament to the power of Los Angeles artists as a social and cultural vanguard, as a movement. He is a huge inspiration for me, and I hope for you. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Museum Rat.